Sup people, it's Multiplier here, and unfortunately this isn't a video about how to sound like Martin Garrix or how to make animals or how to sound like a Vinci. It's something a bit more unexciting, but it's important shit. So we're going to get straight into it so you don't spend too much of your life looking at it. So live preferences, do a click, go over to audio, make sure it's selected, and then we're going to go over to where it says latency, otherwise known as latency. And it's all about buffer size. And it's important to kind of set your buffer size right because it will affect kind of how you use live and how much strain your CPU will be put under. And especially if you've been having problems with your kind of Ableton Live glitching or kind of having audio dropouts, setting the buffer size right is one way you can kind of help kind of alleviate any CPU problems you've been having. So what is buffer size? Well, there's a bunch of technical kind of computery sciencey things about what it does. In simple terms, the lower the number of samples you choose, the lower the latency. However, the more strain you put on your CPU. So by default, I think it's normally set up to be around like 512. And you can see it says input latency, the number of milliseconds there, output latency, number of milliseconds. You can choose something different like 64. We get lower input latency, lower output latency. So you can see by kind of using a different number of samples, you can kind of tweak the amount of latency there is. But yeah, the lower the number of samples, the more strain is kind of put on your CPU. So when do you want to choose a low number of samples and when do you want to choose a high number? So latency basically is like the time delay between you doing something on say something and then something happening. So it's especially important if you're say, I don't know, writing a song, you're kind of playing a bit of like a melody, or you're just kind of recording something into live. You don't want a massive latency, otherwise it's really hard to play in time, and then what you're hearing is sounding a bit delayed, and then you'll get confused, and then you start crying. Not good. So you want to get the latency quite low. However, you can't put it infinitely low all the time, otherwise your computer goes, no. And then it dies, explodes, fire, nightmare. Don't want that happening. So what I normally recommend is start off, I don't know, say 2 samples when you're say recording, and then just keep like whittling it down. I find 28 samples normally by far good enough to kind of record your shit in. I normally run about 64 if not 28 samples when I'm kind of generally writing songs, but then what I'll do is kind of stick it back up to say 256 or 5 when it comes to mixing, because when it comes to mixing, you're not really playing shit in live, so it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of latency. You need your computer to be able to handle what you're doing, and especially by the time you get to mixing, you got a lot more effects and shit, a lot more processing, and a lot more action in live. So that's my general bit of advice. Just kind of play around with the number of samples, but keep it low initially when you're like recording shit. It's also worth noting, a lot of the time, if you're recording with stuff like reverb on, a lot of the time reverb plugins have like a little button that determines how much processor power they're using. So what you can normally do is just kind of toggle that kind of off and on or between various CPU loads, so that when you're recording, it's not really doing much calculation for the reverb, because it doesn't matter when you're recording it in. And then when you come to mixing, stick it all on like the high processing settings. And then, because yeah, you've got plenty of time to kill. It's all good when you're mixing. Same with limiters and stuff like that. I know like in Ozone, there's loads of little buttons everywhere that says like, I don't know, ultra mode or whatever. Yeah, pretty much every plugin has some sort of button somewhere that kind of reduces the strain on the CPU. So if you are finding your computer's kind of conking out, just kind of click those buttons that take some strain off, at least initially. And then, yeah, whack this number of samples up. Now, changing the number of samples won't just immediately solve all your problems if your computer is going mental at you. Sometimes you have to do some other things, so I might as well chuck in some more tips while we're on the CPU sitch. Sample rate, don't really need to be recording. You don't really need to have a sample rate very high at all, to be honest. 48,000 is going to be more than enough for most of the time. Personally, I just leave it as 44.1K pretty much all the time. Simply because I'm not recording any instruments really myself. So yeah, fuck it. 44.1 will do, which will be sweet. And yeah, what other useful CPU tips are there? Yeah, if you've got like a million different, I don't know, tracks all with their own reverb on, but they've all got the same reverb, learn about return tracks, like create, insert return track. It's all gone. Where's it gone? Click that button. There it is. to learn about return tracks. That's one way to save CPU. Another way to save CPU is if you have like a zillion different layers all kind of running MIDI through like CPU intensive plugins, bounce some of those out to kind of audio, so it doesn't have to do all the processing all the time, which is cool. That's a whole bunch of information. Wasn't very exciting, I know, but it was only 5 minutes, 29, 30, 31-ish seconds, so don't get annoyed. You need to know about this stuff. It's important. So once you have everything set up right, then Ableton doesn't get in your way. If your computer's going mad at you, that's going to get in the way of you making cool, creative decisions about what to do. With regards to dropping files and devices here. Sweet, I've been Multiplier. This has been amazing. It's been emotional. Stop record.